Yeah, to begin, thank you all for joining us on your Wednesday evening from, it seems, everyone's comfortable home offices. Welcome to the latest version of the WHU Startup School Workshop series, brought to you by the WHU Entrepreneurship Center. This is an initiative that has been kicked off by the Entrepreneurship Center, but with the guidance and support of a group of bachelor students that kind of approached us and said, hey, there's a bunch of things that we want to learn about in entrepreneurship that we're not always getting in the classroom. So our goal here is to provide some learning opportunities from experts and professionals in the field that are part of the WHU community, to talk about some very relevant startup and entrepreneurship topics that maybe we want to get a little more of than we do in the academic setting. So much thanks to Mohit Butt and Alex Petkoff. I know they're two here, Jonas Klein, the three bachelor students that really kind of pushed me to kick this initiative off. And hopefully this is something that will continue long into the future in WHU and potentially become a student-driven initiative. But we kicked this off last semester with our first workshop, which was around starting up as a student. We did one recently on product development. This one coming up that we have today is around acceleration and incubation. We'll be doing one next month on customer discovery and customer development. And we'll wrap up the year in April with one on fundraising and capitalization. So as you can see, it's kind of following a trajectory, really trying to follow the life cycle of an early stage venture. So as you're contemplating or working on your ventures throughout the year, you're going to get resources hopefully at the right time when you need them. But today we're focusing on incubation and acceleration for a reason. One of those reasons is this acceleration season in Germany. Techstars Berlin is underway. Alchemist is kicking off a new program. APX is, of course, always running. And we at WHU are today announcing our very first cohort of the WHU Summer Accelerator program, where applications are opening today. So as a precursor to that, I wanted to bring in two really esteemed guests to kind of share their experiences. The first one is my dear friend Johann Romefort. He was the managing director of Techstars, the Bosch Siemens Future Home Accelerator in München, and he is now a mentor and entrepreneur in residence for multiple Techstars programs around the world, Turin, Abu Dhabi, and Berlin. Also supports Alchemist and other programs, and is not only a accelerator guru, but a successful founder himself and an engineer. So he is that rare unicorn of technical and entrepreneurial chops. So always much you can learn from people like that. Our second esteemed guest is Mike Mahlkow, who many of you know as a WHU alum. And when we think of accelerator programs, Mike and his team at Blair were members of the Y Combinator 2019 class. And together, these two fine gentlemen are going to bring some really unique perspectives. Johann will be kind of sharing what accelerator programs do and what they look for in founders that are applying for them. And then Mike is going to kind of take the other end of the spectrum and talk to founders and how they can maximize their opportunities in participating in an accelerator program. And then the third piece will be presented by me. I'll introduce you guys to the WHU Accelerator, what we're going to provide, what the application process is like, and how to get started. The format of today is we're going to kind of break it up in three separate sessions. So Johann will present first. We will provide some time for Q&A, then take a couple-minute break. Mike will follow with the same structure. He'll present, we'll have some time for Q&A, and then I will go at the end. So what I ask you guys is when the presentations occur, if you have questions, just write your questions in the chat. And when the presenters are done, I will kind of moderate through and call on you and or ask questions on your behalf if you are not there. So as you do come up with ideas, just type them in the chat. I'm going to go from the top of the list and work my way down. So we will try to reserve enough time that all of you guys can have your questions answered. Cool. Maybe see some heads nodding. Okay, great. Well then, let's kick things off. I don't want to be the talking head anymore. Let's kick things off and give everyone a warm WHU welcome to Johann Romefort from Techstars.
All right. So first, nice to meet you all. Thanks a lot for having me, Gerrit. I really appreciate that. I always love to share some insights with founders. My voice is kind of fading away. I did a bunch of workshops today, so it's like, it's a bit weak today, but hopefully I'll still have a bit of voice for you guys. All right, maybe I'll start with a bit of background about myself, even though Gerrit touched base on a few things there. My background is in software engineering. Initially, I started my career as a software architect, worked in different industries, gaming, copyright, travel. And then in 2007, co-founded my own company with another bunch of French founders and decided to move to San Francisco. I was also a CTO for this company. We raised a bunch of money, 16 million, sold the company in 2012. And then I transitioned to another role, which was more on the outside facing sort of role, where I was a tech evangelist, where my mission was to make the brand of my company known in the tech ecosystem. So I organized more than 200 meetups in 3 years, 3 conferences. And then from there, I transitioned to yet another role as a managing director at Techstars, which is more focused on investment, but also, tapping into the network that I built previously. So we'll focus on that today. So what gives you the best chance to get into an accelerator program? I think that's the question we want to answer today. And how do accelerators look at that, right? How do they sift through hundreds of applications? Maybe first, let me give you an overview about the process that we are following. So when it comes to Techstars Accelerator, and actually many accelerators out there is this application phase, right? Where we do a lot of reach out to funders, try to build some awareness around the program, traveled a lot when we could still travel back then, to meet a lot of funders and get them interested into the program. And from there, basically we ask them one thing, which is to apply to the program. And this application is going through F6S, which is one of the big platform out there where you can apply to many different accelerators, incubators, and whatnot. And and that kind of already starts the selection, right? Because you're being asked a bunch of questions, and depending on how you're going to answer those questions with how much depth and effort you're going to put in there, we are going to rank you. We also ask for videos, and the reason we do that, which we know put the founders sometimes in a bit of an uncomfortable position. It's tough to record yourself pitching and presenting the team, is that because it gives us insight about the team, right? About your human qualities. And I'll get back to that, but that's a really important part actually of the application process. We really do look at watch those videos one by one. So for any given accelerator, like Techstars Accelerator, at least we receive anything between 200 and more than 1,000 applications, depending on how specific the program is. My program was extremely specific. It was about the future of home living, and yet we received about 300 to 400 applications, right? And some programs, they are slightly older, have more presence in the ecosystem. If we look at the Boulder program from Techstars, it's been around for I don't know, 12 years or something like that. So they receive thousands of applications. So you already need to be, to impress there, right? You need to really put a lot of thoughts into this application and just don't see it as something accessory. Um, and then from there, like once we have like all this application in, and sometimes actually even before we start taking calls with the funders, right? If I see some company that I really like, I will reach out to them and like get into a conversation. Most likely it's gonna be about presenting the program, gauge their interest, and also for me to gauge like, how likely I can see them fitting with the program. One of the reasons we do that actually early on is to give us a lot of time to assess the execution of the team. Because let's say that my program will start in February. I start my application process like in June or July up until September. And during that time, I will already take some calls with funders, right? And I'm only gonna make a decision about those companies end of November. So in those months, I have a lot of opportunity to like keep on going with calls and try to assess like how fast they execute, which is a really important criteria for us. But let's get back to it. So like once applications are in, we are basically transitioning to interviews. So I will take this list of a few hundred companies and sift through it, like read all the application, watch all the videos, and come up with like a top 80 or 60, depending, right? Of like, if I find a lot of interesting companies. And I'll do a first call. And during that call, I want to assess the fit and the mutual interest. I won't get into much details, but I will assess things such as, do I like the founder? Do they feel coachable? How do they behave when they're being challenged, and those sort of things. Again, like pretty shallow, just to get to know each other, see if it could be a fit. Then I get to a top 40. So I basically remove like half of it. And this company might not be in my top 40 because the fit is not really strong. There were some red flags during the first interview. I just didn't feel them, right? And sometimes it's actually quite intangible. There's a lot of gut feeling involved, to be honest. And like any investor you're gonna talk to, like, is going to talk about that. As much as they are data driven and as much as we are data driven at Techstars, like there is a huge part of gut feeling in there, which we listen to. In my top 40, I will look at the team. So we have 6 criteria at Techstars when we do selection. Team, that's the first 3. Traction, market, and idea, in that order, right? Why team? Well, for early stage companies, that's probably the best data point we have, right? Like they didn't build that much at this stage. They might not have like crazy traction. The idea is still like being refined. They don't have a proper market fit, but we want to see what is the potential, right? And more importantly, we want to assess if we want to work with them or not. So when I say team, you might be wondering like, okay, like what are the particular things you look at? Likability, do I like them, right? Like, is there a flow? Is there like a good, communication going on between us? Of course, like I'm gonna put some emphasis on the CEO, but I like to see the whole team. So don't just show the CEO, like really try to bring all the people on your team in those meetings, because we also look at the dynamic between those people, how they interact with each other, how do they divide and conquer when I ask questions, those sort of things. Coachability is a huge one for us, and the reason for that is that when you get into an accelerator, you're gonna get a lot of feedback, more than you ever wished to have. And depending on how coachable you are, meaning like how willing you are to digest the information you're gonna get, your level of success will depend a lot on that in our experience. If you think that you already know everything and that mentors are just stupid, I had founders like that, like I'm talking from experience there. It might not be a good fit, right? Like you won't get as much as you need from the program. We look at things like body language, like how the founders are behaving, like are they tense, are they like anxious, can they communicate properly? Sometimes it gives us insight about like, are they lying to us? So some of them do, right? Like for sure. And we are pretty good at that because we do, like I would do like hundreds of interviews per year. And so we are pretty good at detecting like all those subtleties that, you know, founders try to hide sometimes. I will also pay a lot of attention to the question asked. Are they, you know, are they asking questions? Like, are they like hungry? Are they willing to learn? That's a really good indicator for me. If they are like more passive and just waiting for me to, you know, bring on questions, or if I ask, do you have questions? And they're like, no, not a good sign for me, right? We sometimes we play mind tricks as well, right? Like I would challenge founders on purpose to see how they react. Are they conflict avoidant? Are they, do they think they, you know, like they know better? That's really to assess the coachability. Are they interested in what I'm saying and like building on top of it? Those things we pay a lot of attention to. And I will also ask behavioral questions to assess things such as conflict avoidance. Like, you know, give me an example of last conflict you had with one of your co-founder, and how did you go through it? Like, how did you manage it? If people are like, yeah, we never have conflicts, that's also a red flag for me. Like, you gotta have conflicts, right? Otherwise, it's probably something you're not doing right. Yeah, and sometimes I also play dirty tricks. I will, like much further down the line when I do interviews, but I will say, hey, Mike, what is it that you don't like about your CEO? You know, and sometimes it's really interesting what you learn from that, right? Like, because people don't expect those questions. Yeah. Some people don't expect this, like most people don't expect those questions. So they have like really candid answers to that, which we really pay a lot of attention to. That when it comes to the team, that's what we look at, right? Like it's very important for us again. I like personally, I like founders with charisma, for example, because it gives them an edge on the competition if they are able to really like, you know, kill it with a pitch. Like it's something you need to work on, right? Like being good at pitching. Like you will learn it through the program, but it gives an edge. To me, it says like, this guy is going to be good at, you know, convincing customers, at convincing investors to invest in the company. So then when we sort of like pass this and like, you know, those questions are recurring like from one meeting to another, like there will be more of them in the next interviews. But then my next interview is going to be about market, right? Like, no, actually, sorry, traction. And with the traction, like what I'm trying to see is, I like the idea, I like the team, otherwise like I don't process further, but is this team actually able to execute fast? And that's also why we do these interviews in a span of like a few months, because we can actually see through those few months like how much progress have been made. If I don't see any progress, like it's not a good indicator, right? I want those founders to be like, hey, you know, like we killed it last week. Like we had like you know, those meetings. We are getting close to product market fit, whatever that is. But like, show me the progress, right? And then I will look at the market. So and how they think about the markets that they are addressing. A lot of companies, they try to satisfy too many customers. They have like big markets they're tapping into. You know, I get this thing all the time. Like if you can even get like 1% of this huge market, like we're gonna be rich and retire, you know, on an island. the question is really like, how do you get there, right? Like, how did you start? Yes, you have a big market, but do you have any competitive advantage on your team when it comes to talking to your first customers and to tap into this market? How do you see it? Do you try to tackle everything at the same time and like really go for the entire market? Or are you choosing like more like a niche approach and then like expand from it? As you can imagine, like what we like is like the world are going niche first and then expanding, because it just never works to tackle a huge market by trying to satisfy everyone. It's really hard also to know if you have product market fit, because you're going to talk to so many different types of potential customers that you're going to get drowned in the feedback that you get, and you won't know, you know, what is the next thing I need to do, right? And one of the questions that I will ask is, how do you plan to secure your first, 10 customers if you're a B2B enterprise, 100 customers if you're, B2C, or 1,000 customers? Is there anyone on the team who has like, industry knowledge and kind of an advantage there? So that's for the market. And the last thing is the idea, actually, because the idea is not that it's irrelevant, but we do know for sure that it might change, and we are totally fine with it, right? Like, we chose you for the team, really, and for how you think about, like, approaching the market, and for your execution skills. The idea will probably change over the course of the program. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's fine as well. And sometimes it's a huge pivot, like the idea will just like totally be different at the end of the program, which is fine, right? Like, at the end of the day, what we want is you to build a big company. And if you realize that, you started on the wrong path, it's totally fine to course correct that and go after the big one. Yeah, I guess that's kind of, an overall thing about that. I put a lot of emphasis on, communication. I think when I failed, and when I say I failed, like I sometimes, like during my first program, to be honest, it's always a learning experience, right? To be an investor. So, you get really good after quite a few years, actually. And so there are things that you're going to miss out. By the way, what we do as well is we ask people to go through different rounds of interviews with different people, because I do have blind spots. There are things that I won't ask that I should be asking, or things that I won't see that I should be seeing, right? And some other people, some other managing directors or investors, like I bring like really diversity into this process to cover for those blind spots and for those biases. That's very important. But I want you to like really impress me, right? Like with how you behave, with your, you being like really hungry, looking for advice, really wanting to improve. That's really what I want to see. Questions?
Cool. Thanks, Johann. I was taking a lot of notes there, so really awesome. Guys, if you have any questions, maybe you could type them into the chat, and we can kind of put a little structure to it. But I'll start with a question, Johann, that I think is really quite relevant, since you're talking to mostly people that are part of a business school. And, we have incredible commercialization minds and finance and marketing chops and whatnot. But oftentimes we see a lot of startups that maybe don't have what some would see as complete teams. Can you share a little bit your kind of approach and your experience to taking teams that are either solo founders, or maybe are business minds that don't have CTOs, or maybe don't have domain expertise in the industry that they're targeting, and how do you see those types of processes?
Sure, yeah, definitely. That's a really good question, Gerrit. Look, like we are heavily discouraged to take solo founders, for example, but we still do. Like you'll see them in every program. The reason we are discouraged from doing that is that it's really, really hard when you're solo founder and you have to go through an acceleration program and run a company at the same time. It's already hard when you have a team, right? So if you're solo, it's extremely hard. And also, obviously you won't cover like all the things you should be covering. So you might be like a business founder and you still don't have like a CTO. What I will look at there is, do I believe that this person has enough energy and grit to overcome that challenge? Are they actually looking for other team members and for some co-founders, or are they just like, no, I'm fine? Like I have seen some of them like that. No, you know what? Like I prefer to stay solo founder because in my past experience, I had so many trouble with co-founders that this one will be just me. That is a red flag because that's not how you grow a big company, right? You need to have a team. Then what I will look at is, and that goes for like technical co-founders or technical solo founders, is do they have at least a bit of business acumen, right? A lot of them don't, and but the things they do, or the things that it's just another thing to solve, like a piece of code to write, but it's not, right? Like it is a position in itself. Like you need to to have a good understanding of the market, of your competition, of acquire skills in pitching and things like that. If I don't see those people interested by that, then I just won't take them. I will take solo founders when they really, really impress me. And I've done it, right? Like, and successfully, to be honest, because I really believed in them and they didn't disappoint. But yeah, it's been tough for them, right? Like they had to do so many things at the same time. By the way, another thing that I'm doing during selections that you might not see in a lot of accelerators, but I will do like a technical check on the company. I will assess, if the CTO is good, or if even if like if it's an outsourcing company, I will ask to talk to them, right? To make sure that everything is in order, and that I just don't. I'm not dealing with just like a CEO who's like super charismatic, and I had some like that, right? Like they can really sell you like a huge vision, and like you're pretty impressed, and then like when you dig further in the tech, you realize that it's just like there's nothing, right? Or the CTO is like so inexperienced that it's gonna take a long time for him to acquire the skills that he needs.
Just a quick follow up on that, Johann, because you mentioned that in some cases the tech is outsourced, and you may talk to the company that's providing that tech. Is that something that you see quite often? The reason I'm asking is, again, we have a lot of business students, and oftentimes the missing piece is a CTO. And the easy alternative to MVP and early market testing is outsourcing the tech, or maybe having an early hire as like a senior engineer, but maybe not a technical co-founder. Do you see that as a red flag or a deal breaker in most cases? Or you as a technical guy, I'm sure, have stronger opinions on that side, or are you open to that?
No, I am open to that because, I mean, let's be honest, it's hard to find a technical co-founder, right? Like those people are pretty out on the market right now, and they've been for a long time. So it is not something easy to achieve. But that being said, a lot can be achieved through, having either like freelance developers or dev shop. I guess the thing there is like dev shops. Some of them are really good, some of them are really bad, and that's also something I want to give back to the founder as a sort of like advice. Like do I believe in this dev shop or not? Are they building things properly, or like are they going into the really wrong direction, which will make them lose so many months in rebuilding things with a proper CTO. I think it's fine to use a dev shop. Like what I always really appreciate is that when there is at least a technical person on the team, even if he doesn't have a team of engineers behind him, of his own engineers, someone who can see through the bullshit that sometimes dev shops are, pitching you. That brings me confidence. At the end of the day, you need to, one way to see, this selection process, and like, that's me talking with my investor hat. And you'll see that, across meetings with VCs later on, is what is the degree of risk that I'm taking as an investor, right? I'm invested in all the companies, by the way, that, that are going through the programs. And so I do have an interest in like how much risk I'm taking when I take them. Are they going to like, buy me a house at some point in Spain or something? Or like, is the level of risk like, is it something I cannot really manage to take because just too many things that are like sort of red flags, right?
Gotcha. Thanks. I think the next question is from Mara Kuna. Do you want to ask your question, Mara?
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering about the red flags you mentioned during the interviews. Do you think they're also applicable for when looking for a co-founder? And could you also mention some of these red flags?
Yes, absolutely important when you're looking for a co-founder. Because again, when we look at likability, coachability, like it really means like, do we want to work with those people? And it's really intense, like an accelerator program is intense. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, which is, by the way, another thing I will try to assess as well. Like I've done that since forever. Like I started my career, as like hiring some people for a support team. And stress was a huge component of that. Like, will they be able to manage stress when they have like 100 clients on the phone per day? So I will stress them on purpose by, disagreeing with something or like being almost like rude to them to see how they behave. Are they keeping their cool? Do they have like a structure, answer to it? Or is it just like panicking, right? But back to your question, I think, red flags that I see, conflict avoidance is a big one. Like, are they able to manage conflict, have difficult conversation? It's pretty important. And I've seen founders who are like extremely charismatic, but who are like absolutely conflict avoidant, right? Like I've seen cases where like some employee change their titles on the website and they won't even talk to them to see what's going on. I had one founder like that. Like it was like, hey, my employee put himself as a CMO, but he's just like a marketing guy. Like, is that okay? Like, no, it's not okay. First, and second, you need to talk to them. And it was like, do I really need to talk to them? I'm like, yeah, you need to talk to them. And it was just so conflict avoidant, right? That it creates a fake harmony in the company that kills a lot of companies. Like I also do tech due diligence for private equity and VCs. I had deals falling through because, let's say, the CTO is extremely conflict avoidant. So, like look at those things definitely. Another thing that I would do, by the way, is, and that I encourage you to do with co-founders, is my last interview will be like, okay, so I like you guys. What is it that I don't know about the company? What are the skeletons in the closet? What are the things that you prefer to hide from me? But I'm telling you, I need to know, because like I'm gonna run background checks on you, and you better come clean about it, because we'll find out, right? And sometimes you hear interesting things there. It's definitely something you got to do, and ask also for reference, right? Like sometimes if I see that I'm connected through like a common connection to one founder, I will talk and talk to people who know them and ask them what they think about them. Yeah.
Thanks. I think the next question will, Lucas, do you want to ask your first question? I think I saw you had two in there.
Yeah, for sure. So my question was, You mentioned that you look a lot for the like personal traits in founders, but how important is like problem founder fit for you as an accelerator? Like academically, for example, having deep knowledge in the actual area of the problem versus just being like passionate about solving a problem.
I think we look at both, right? First, I like founders who are passionate about solving a problem. Like I really need to feel that, you know, you want to solve that pain, and like you won't settle until like it's done, right? It has to be like a niche that you want to scratch, and of course, you know, if you have deep knowledge in your industry, that's definitely a huge bonus. Sometimes, you know, it might happen that I like the founder, I see, you know, that they're executing well, but I see a lot of problems in them not knowing so much about the market they're tackling, and it might be specific to like a, you know, particular market. So let's say, for example, you want to tackle like something in the health industry. Like you need to have like at least a bit of background about like how this industry works, right? Like if you can have some knowledge in there, that's quite important. Or like industries that are heavily regulated, you know, like it's important to know before like, you know, going wild with your ideas, like what are going to be the potential limitation due to the regulations.
Cool. I think we've got about 5 more minutes, so we'll get through a couple more questions here. Allegro, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I would like to know if you actually look at the founders' CVs or university grades, like, I don't know, people do in big companies. Do you do that in the application process or not?
We don't. I think it's quite irrelevant to me, to be honest, because I've seen founders with, you know, like terrific academic background who don't have founder DNA, as we call it, and I've also seen dropouts who are like so hungry and so like willing to, you know, make a dent into the world that it just drops you know, the skills that they have. So yeah, I myself, like, you know, I would never work for a company who's like, hey, give me your grades. Like I had that, I always decline. Like, I don't think that should be a good lens to look at me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one too. I think Mike does too. I saw his throw it in on the chat. I believe I skipped Daniel Hofinger by accident. Sorry, Daniel. Do you want to ask your question?
No worries. Okay, yes. What would be your decision criteria, whether to choose an incubator or an accelerator or go without any program?
I'm not sure I got this question.
Okay, what would be the reasons to choose an accelerator, or would you rather decide for an incubator or go at all without any program? Like, how would you decide?
All right, yeah, okay, I get it. Look, I think incubator versus accelerator, this is like, I think a dimension of maturity, right? Incubator will really teach you like all the ropes, will potentially help you to find a co-founder, and like really, you know, bring you through this process to learn like really the basics, right? An accelerator is slightly different. Like what we aim for is growth. So we take a company, we see a lot of potential in it, and we try to accelerate the growth of this company to make it, you know, an exponential growth. That's what we're looking at. And so obviously you need to have, you know, a bit more meat on the bone, so to speak, to be part of that. And both are great, right? Like I've been a mentor, for example, at the Founder Institute, which is more like an incubator. They're doing great with the founders because like they have people who, you know, don't have any funding experience before, they don't have co-founders. They really helps them to get to the next level when then they can apply to an accelerator. Going without programs, it depends on your team really, right? Like maybe maybe the team has already been through an accelerator, or one of the team members have been through it and learned the ropes through that. In my opinion, like there's always something to learn in an accelerator. I have a founder who was like 66 years old when he joined. He built 10 companies before that. One of them went IPO, 4 of them were acquired, like amazing founder. He went through my program and it was like, like honestly, I was not expecting much. Like I liked you, Johann. It's just like the main reason like for which, I picked the program, because I believe that you could teach us something, and you did. Like it was an amazing experience. It's just so many things I've learned, and that I didn't learn through my entire career before. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And more importantly, I would have loved to be part of an accelerator when I co-founded my company, because just so many things you don't know, right? It's really hard sometimes to get feedback, to connect with people, to get a bit of feedback about your company. Like when you have like tons of mentors, I know Gerrit is planning on bringing like a lot of them, like we do at Techstars. Like it's insane the level of feedback you get, right? Like you're going to interact with like 100 people in the span of 2 to 3 weeks. It's like one in a lifetime opportunity to get that much feedback, which is also why we're looking at coachability as such an important strength. Because if you don't get anything from those 100 interviews with mentors, then like something is wrong, right? And you won't be able to grow the company. So, and moreover, I think there's a dimension of like almost, loneliness. It's a really lonely road to be an entrepreneur, and you need to find some support. And accelerators are meant for that. Like I still support the founders from my first program. I support a lot of founders from other programs as well. Like they can always, send me a WhatsApp saying, hey, like I don't feel well. Can I talk to you? And that's game changer when you're an entrepreneur and you're just like, in your own head. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, totally. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Awesome. Thanks. Guys, I know there's a couple more questions, but we need to make sure we give Mike adequate time as well. And hopefully we can get to Wanjun's and Luis's questions throughout the workshop. So I've got you guys still teed up, but I know Johann has probably to go Zoom with Abu Dhabi and his teams over there coming up really soon. But Johann, thank you very much for sharing these really valuable insights. I think it's great for all of our founders here. It's also great for me as we're kicking off the accelerator program, and your wisdom is appreciated. So from all of us at WHU, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Gerrit.
Yeah, Mike, if you just want to take it away whenever you're ready.
Yeah, always ready. So I'm Mike, one of the co-founders of Blair. We started our company in early 2019. You can think about it as a technology-based brain capital for the US. So what we're doing is we set up income share agreement programs for educational institutions. So we help them to set up something that's known in Germany as either umgekehrter Generationenvertrag or Bildungsfonds, and in the US it's basically income share agreement. And we went through YC in the summer of 2019. Before we actually went through YC, we went through another accelerator. So like basically a week after we started the business, we were accepted into an early stage accelerator in San Francisco focused on immigrant founders. That was very small, like a very small batch size, only 8 companies, including our own company. And then immediately afterwards, we were accepted into YC. Very different, 200 companies at once, very established infrastructure. And yeah, I think I want to talk about 3 things. One, what you can learn from accelerators. And then also I have the visibility into smaller accelerators and bigger accelerators because they differ a bit. And then I can also talk a bit about what you just heard from Johann, which is about like how do you actually get accepted to these accelerators from the founder perspective. And then lastly, let's just like shoot all the questions that you have. You can everywhere where I haven't signed an NDA, I'm very happy to tell you everything I know. So feel free to be as straightforward and direct as you want to be. So basically, I think there are a couple of main things you can take away from an accelerator. One thing that was mentioned before, which I think is one of the most important ones. Oh, my screen is frozen. Can you still hear me? Okay, that is weird.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Mike?
Me too.
Okay, yeah, my Zoom is frozen. So, okay, as long as you can hear me, I'll try to figure out what my Zoom is doing. And yeah, so basically what you can think of when you are doing accelerators, one of the most important things is a support network. You have questions. And I don't even mean that only for, let's see.
I think we lost him for a second.
That was weird, but I'm back.
There you are.
That never happened to me before. Okay, so basically, one of the most important things I was talking about that is having a support network as a founder, because as was mentioned before, being a founder is fairly lonely, even if you have co-founders, because you're basically constantly bombarded with all of these problems and questions, and you can't answer any of them. Maybe you have, like, maybe there are 50 questions at once. You have like half an idea about how to answer one of them. And you're just constantly overwhelmed with the next problem, the bigger thing. And the other thing is, once you've achieved something, you can be happy about it, maybe for a day, but then the next 20 problems just come crushing in. I have a great example. We announced a fairly big debt raise last week, because as you can imagine, our business model, we built the technology layer so that schools can offer these income share agreements where we onboard the students and then also service the students afterwards when they get a job and pay back basically the tuition afterwards as a percentage of their income. So we have this tech product, but then we also just launched another financial layer on top where we purchase these income share agreements from our partner schools, at least from some of the partner schools. And for that, we just closed a $100 million debt round. And I was really happy about that for a day. And then the next couple of days were the most stressful days we had, I don't know, in a very long while. So even the big achievements just feel like they are a thing of the past very quickly. And you are constantly just, especially in the very early days, bombarded with many, many things that are difficult. And then also, right when you start out, you have almost no idea what you're doing. Like, it's very difficult to know what the right decision is, which direction to go into. So having external input from people who have either done it before or other founders you can talk to who are in a similar stage, who can basically be a sounding board and who can tell you that you're not mentally insane and that you're really just going through the normal phase of being an early stage founder, all of that is almost invaluable. So I think if we hadn't had the support of our mentors at the accelerator, of our peers at YC or in the accelerator program, one, we would have had a much bigger problem coping with all the stress. And then two, we would have solved many of our problems much, much, much slower. And some of them we wouldn't have solved at all, because sometimes you just need specific expertise. And you can always try to get intros to the right people and get your expertise more directly, but sometimes it's helpful to have a structure around it. So yeah, support network is great on the one side, from a mental perspective and just making sure that you cope with the stress, but then also from a professional network perspective. So a couple of examples for why knowing other founders is extremely valuable. One, they can introduce you to investors. Two, often you have the same questions and some of your friends will have done it before. So you can just ask them. For example, let's just use a very basic example. Let's think you just raised a bit of money, you want to hire your first employee, but you have no idea which contracts to use, what kind of onboarding structure you should use. He said like all of these things that you've just never really thought about. And now you think, okay, that sounds easy, but if you actually have to do it, things always look very different. So when you actually have to do these things, you can either do like some research or build everything from first principles, but that's not what you want to do. You want to be very smart and use first principles where it gives you a competitive advantage, but you don't want to reinvent the wheel where there is a best practice. For example, with a contract for an employee. You don't want to tell your law firm or like some lawyer, please craft me a contract and then be charged thousands and thousands of dollars for that. You just want a template from someone else that has used it before and that knows that it's good. So quicker, cheaper, and you don't have to do anything fancy here. Similar with the onboarding plan, there are some basic structures of how you should onboard new employees. And you can think about how you want to do it within your own culture, but there are just some things that you can learn very quickly. So there are some generalizable rules that almost every startup can use. And then there are specific things to your own business. And the great thing about accelerators is if they are good, because that's something I want to talk about later, the quality difference between accelerators is insanely big. But if they're a good accelerator, they can take care of almost all of your standardizable questions. They know which documents to use with investors, what's a good process with investors, how to like structure like very basic things like hiring, your marketing plan, how do you attribute costs, like all of these things, or like Google AdWords, like they know who to talk to or they can tell you directly. And then there is the more operational strategic questions about your own business. And there it is less of a straightforward thing, but they can brainstorm with you, or maybe they can introduce you to a founder who is 3 years ahead of you, who had similar problems, and you can talk to them. But there the advice is way more specific. But even carving out all of that time that you would otherwise need to solve these problems that you run into that are standardizable, like minimizing that to a small chunk of what you would otherwise need gives you way more time and flexibility to do what's actually important, which means building the product and talking to your customers. So that's the second thing that's very helpful with accelerators, that they just help you with these things that are obvious to you, but maybe not obvious to other people. And yeah, apparently my Zoom is bugging again. It's really weird. Can you still hear me?
Still hear you, Mike.
Okay, I definitely have to fix that because I'm talking to some investors later today about the next debt round. But yeah, that's my probably 500. Zoom has never done that. I might have to, like, I'll just see what I do. Maybe I have to rejoin again. Let's see.
And we lost you, I think. Well, I don't know if you guys are having troubles, but I can tell you here in Fallander, the internet has been wonky all day. So it seems to be happening in a lot of places. Germany, one of the most innovative countries in the world with some of the worst internet connections.
Yeah,
not just you, Mike.
Don't move to Berlin. I don't know if that's the problem. I just closed everything on my laptop. And the thing is, I usually have a 100 Mbit LAN connection. So maybe it's just something is going on here. But I'll just continue where I left the conversation. So basically, standardizable things carve you out more time, which is very good because you can focus on the strategic questions. Next thing that they can help you with is they can really help you with investors once you start fundraising. And that's usually, at least often it is one of the main things that these accelerators do, is helping you to get to your first round of like actual capital. Because investors usually, accelerators usually invest money as well, right? But not that much money. So usually after making a lot of traction and growing the business during the accelerator, you usually want to raise your next round. And if they are good, they can definitely help you with that, either through intros or through visibility, etc., etc. And maybe let's talk right now a bit about the big variability in terms of actual helpfulness of accelerators, because I have a very strong opinion on that. I think there are only a very small handful of accelerators that are actually good and helpful. And the vast majority of accelerators is not good and helpful and just not really a waste of time, but yeah, sometimes a waste of time. And then also waste of your equity dilution. And it's really important to figure out which accelerator you join, because you shouldn't just join any accelerator just for the sake of joining an accelerator, because everyone can build an accelerator, right? I can start an accelerator tomorrow, and some random dude who has never done anything with startups before can start an accelerator tomorrow and just say, well, we invest, I don't know, like 50K, you give us 7%, and then he just wings it. And I have a feeling that some accelerators actually do that. And then also there's some corporate accelerators who are also of questionable helpfulness, because sometimes they just scout for new technology, but they're not really meant to accelerate you towards like becoming very, very big. So it's very important that you figure out what you actually need. And let's assume you are in a niche business and you are, I don't know, in insurance, and there's an insurance accelerator from one of the large insurances. Maybe it makes sense for you to do it, but definitely talk to founders before that have done it. If it's not one of the well-established accelerators, and then even if it's one of the well-established accelerators, think really hard about whether you need it and whether you think you would benefit from it. I think like asking Gerrit is probably a good start. He has a good understanding of the accelerator market. And it doesn't have to be, the funny thing is that the accelerators that have visibility are not necessarily the best accelerators. There's some hidden gems that can really help you. Like the first accelerator that we did, no one knew of that. Like it was a very new accelerator. We were the second batch. Like the people who founded it were XYC alums, but it wasn't really this like really big thing that everyone was aware of. And even now, like if I tell you the name, it's called XX Accelerator. Probably none of you have really heard of it. Maybe a couple, I don't know. But it was one of the most helpful things we could have ever done, but only because the people who worked there and helped us were extremely helpful. So take a very good look at who are the mentors at the accelerator, like who is actually working with you. Is it someone who has founded before? Is it someone who has worked in 10 years of like corporate development at some like large SME, but has never really interacted with a startup? So you know which one you should probably choose among them. And then also be very aware of bad deal terms, because especially in the very, very early stage, you can quickly sign things that you don't want to sign. Again, especially in Germany, because in Germany, these things are a bit like more difficult than they sometimes are in the US. So yeah, just be very careful. Talk to some people who are experienced if it's an accelerator that you think you might want to do some background research on. And then one of you asked earlier when you should do an accelerator and when you should just go out on your own. I think it depends on what you think you can achieve and what you need. So if you are at the level where you think that you can raise at least a decent angel round without any kind of external help, then I think skipping an accelerator might make sense. However, again, only if you don't think that you learn enough from the accelerator. And I think if it's a good accelerator, you always learn a lot. And then how you have to think about it is you give up a certain portion of your equity, usually with most accelerators, right? You usually also get some investment, it depends. But if you give up equity, you have to think about how much more valuable does this experience make my company? For example, at YC, you give 7% of equity for 150K then, I think it's 120K now. So it's not the best valuation, right? It's a $2 million valuation roughly. And most people who do YC could raise at a much better valuation, but you just do it. It's just a no-brainer for many people, just because it makes your business like worth twice or 3 times as much, or you can just reach heights you would have otherwise never reached. And it can accelerate, it can literally, like the name, can accelerate you much, much, much faster than anything else could. So looking at how much more valuable can this make my business? And how much can I grow as a founder? And that's also something that many people forget. If you are like, if you have this entrepreneurial blood, this company is probably not your only company. Like you will probably found a second company at some point. And maybe the first one was successful, maybe it wasn't. But regardless of whether or not it was successful, the learnings that you get and the network that you get from the accelerator, you will have your whole life, right? So starting out with something that gives you a lot of input and that helps you to not make mistakes that can be avoided early on in your entrepreneurial journey, I think elevates you to a level that you would otherwise only reach in a couple of years. So if we hadn't done the first two accelerators, I think just not looking at the business, but just looking at us as founders, we would probably be like 1 or 2 levels below where we currently are in terms of understanding, in terms of network, definitely, and in terms of what we think we can achieve. So I think all of these issues are important. And then one other thing that I wanted to talk about is getting conflicting advice or getting lots and lots of advice, because as was mentioned earlier, again, in the chat, is when you do an accelerator, you get lots of input, like way more input than you can imagine. And that's good. You want a lot of input. But then also like person 1 will tell you do A, person B will tell you definitely don't do A, like never do A, do C instead. And then you have these like 2 people that you respect having like very, very diametrically opposing views of what you should do. In the end, it's always your decision because it's your business. But getting external input is very helpful, but also trying to see the input through the lens of the person that's giving it. Because let's assume the person you're talking to, I don't know, they sold their business after 2 years for way too much money to one of the big tech companies because that's like an actual WHU story, because they like hit a very, very nice spot, like in terms of timing. And the big tech company was just looking for something like that. They will look at it very differently than someone who had to work 5 years on their business until they actually found something resembling product market fit. And there are many, many other examples, right? So you always have to look at it through who gives you the advice, what is their background, and what you can take from it. In terms of what accelerators are looking for, there were a lot of good things said earlier. Team is very important. In my opinion, if you want to build a big company, having a very capable tech founder is, I mean, it's not necessarily, you don't need it. Like you can theoretically do it without it, but it just improves your chances very significantly if you have one. So especially for all like business school people here, having a capable CTO it just opens up so many new business opportunities, right? Because there's so many businesses like business people can't build. It just doesn't work. You need someone who you trust, who's capable of building the product. And I think finding the right person there is one of the most important things you have to do early on. If you're not the person yourself, like, I mean, maybe some of you are, I don't know. But I think generally you should be very, very mindful of your competitive disadvantage if you don't have a capable tech co-founder. And then one more thing about what investors are looking for, and that's not only for accelerators, but for early stage investors in general. You can think about it as something similar to like a letter of proof. And you can also Google it. There's a great article about it, but I think that's more for Series A. But how they think about it is, the very first thing they look at is team. Like, who are these people that we're interacting with? Do we like the team? Second thing, do we like the general idea? Like, do we like what they are talking about? And there are even accelerators who give you an offer because they like you as a team, but they tell you, don't do this idea. The idea is very stupid. Do something else. It happened to a couple of my friends at WHU where they really liked the team, but they didn't like the idea at all. So they just did something else. But okay, team first, then idea. Then they look at, have they started, like, do they have the capability of actually building this idea, right? Can they build the product? Then they look at, do they have, like, have they started building the product? Is there something that we can look at, even if it's just a small demo? The next step is the product finished? Like, is there any kind of prototype? Like, is a functionable version of the product anywhere? The next thing you have to do is launching. And now, like every step that I'm currently going through, the next step is almost always better. Like, okay, I don't like to use absolute statements, but for the sake of simplicity, the next step is always better than the first step. So if you have a product but haven't launched, that's usually worse than having a product and having launched. So do you have a product? Have you launched the product? If you've launched a product, do you have users? Like, is anyone using you? If you have users, how many do you have? And then also, next step would be, do you have paying users? Because you can have users, but maybe they don't pay you. And having paying users is better than having users who don't pay, right? Only if your business model is like very, very niche, then it might not make sense. But paying users better than non-paying users. If you have paying users, is how much money are you making? And then the next step would be, how quickly is that revenue growing? And probably for most companies, like growing revenue is something they can worry during the accelerator or afterwards, and most don't really have it before they apply. But just in general, you can basically take a look at that and just think about how investors look at your business. And going to the next step is always something you always want to prove to accelerators or investors, that you de-risk the business. And de-risking the business you can do by showing traction, showing that you can actually build the product, and then lastly, by making sure that you have paying users and grow. And then, very important point, don't compare yourself too much to other companies your friends co-found or that are in your accelerator batch, because they are very, very different usually. If you're building a fintech company like we did, where it takes a year to just build the product from a regulatory and technical perspective before you can even go out and actually start, it's very different than building like a SaaS B2B tech play for startups, where you need a month to develop the MVP and then can just start selling things, right? You will always be at different stages, and it doesn't make sense to compete with them. Your real competition is somewhere out there, but it's usually not in your accelerator batch, or usually also not in your circle of friends, right? So you never know. And then last thing on that front, you always see all of these people raising money, and then everything's good and happy, and these people annoy me actually. I literally saw a LinkedIn post from someone I actually like and respect, but last week, and he said something like, every day I wake up with a smile and go to bed like super happy because my team is so great. And that's one of the biggest lies I've ever seen. Because as a founder, if you're going to bed with a smile and waking up with a smile every single day, then sometimes something is very weird. And it's like definitely not, I don't know any founder where that's true. So don't believe like the super, like everything's going well, like external perspective. Behind the hood, things are always breaking. And that's one of the cool things about accelerators as well, because they often invite alumni or other people that are like 10 years ahead or like 5 years ahead, and they tell the early founding stories. And even some of the like really big companies, I can't name any names obviously, but like think of some of the really, really big companies that you know out there. And I can tell you like almost every single one of them was a complete shit show in the beginning, and things were breaking and they had no idea what they were doing. And from the external perspective, everything looked great, especially in hindsight. And then in hindsight, they are talking about their like founder stories, and most of the things are true, but they just looked at it from a very specific lens, right? So yeah, the early days are especially demanding, and I think you should take all the help that you can get, and having an accelerator program with people that you trust and with other peers that you can talk about these things is very, very helpful. I think that was a lot of talking from my end. I could talk about this for like the next 3 hours straight, or like probably even longer, but I think it may make sense to go into some Q&A, and I can talk about all my accelerator experience, like first accelerator, WHU experience. I can talk about early stage fundraising. I can basically talk about like everything that you want me to talk about. But maybe Gerrit has some ideas as well.
Mike, yeah, thanks. I know that feeling. You're definitely talking in your wheelhouse and from experience. Guys, if you have some questions, go ahead and type them into the chat while people think things up and start typing them in. I'll prime the pump again with one that's near and dear to my heart, as right now I'm still working with about 10 teams from previous Techstars and Alchemist cohorts, and Just last month, I joined the board of directors of one of the teams. You know, plenty of my fellow mentors have become investors. I even know some that have taken C-level positions and joined the founding team. I'd like to hear from you about your experience with mentorship and, you know, like what kind of relationships you were able to foster, and do you still maintain those relationships and work with the mentors post-program?
Yeah, definitely. So at YC, there is the mix of YC partners who are basically your direct, like the people who directly help you and who are in charge of making sure that you get the resources you need. And we are still in contact with them. Like I talked to our YC partner last week, and like during YC, you obviously talk to them more frequently. Now it's, I don't know, every 2 months, or when there's something important, you just get their input. They just have so many data points, which is just great because they see so many startups, and having like a healthy relationship with them is super, super good. They just introduced like 2 leads to us. We help their portfolio companies. It's basically like a relationship where we help them, they help us. And it's great. Like then at YC or other accelerators as well, having contact with alumni who are a couple of years ahead of you is probably one of the most important things. And we have some friends of the firm who are not investors, who are not in any formal advisor role, but who have helped us more than like probably almost any other people, like with an interest to potential clients, interest to investors, like all of these things. So yeah, I think fostering the relationships and maintaining them over time can be extremely valuable. And you never know what comes out of it, right? As you just said, like just knowing the right kind of people that you want to work with over time is very important, I think. Yeah, you're muted.
Thank you. The one other follow-up question I want to ask is in regard to the other network that you get exposed to through the accelerator, which I think many people think about, which is the investor network. Were you able to raise funds from the investor community from YC, or did that directly contribute to your fundraising, or did you find it outside of that network?
Yeah, definitely. So most of our investors are out of the YC network, but like we raised the first 400K, I think, roughly 420K before we joined YC. And that was just people we knew before. And we weren't actively fundraising then. We just had conversations with them and they just offered us money, and it was just good timing. So I think it's helpful to just know some people who could potentially invest and keep conversations with them, just tell them what you're building. But then, especially now after doing YC, my network of early stage investors is so large that when I ever like have to found a company again, I just don't need to worry about the like at least the first checks. And that's also something that you build over time, right? Building an investor network. And the funny thing is many people that I speak to that are becoming first-time founders or that want to found for the first time, they are often almost the most worried about fundraising. And I can totally understand that because fundraising is a bit daunting, right? Just asking other people for money. And then you have to ask other people for more money than you probably have ever seen before. And like once you start asking people for like once you like have to raise like 7 digits of like real life money, things become very real very quickly. So it's just something you have to get used to, and it's something you get better at over time, just being comfortable with actually asking for them. And then also building your investor network is something that you automatically do over time because you speak to more people. Some of your friends become investors, etc., etc. So that's organically just growing. And does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask Patrick Klimpa. Would you like to ask Mike your question?
Yeah, so it's a little bit related to what you just said, like growing your investor network, but it's about the early stage investment actually, or fundraising at that point. So you with your B2B business, would you recommend going through business angels first or VCs, or would you rather say, okay, I have some clients as businesses that are already using my product, maybe they would pitch in if they can see the value in growing the company further for themselves as well.
So maybe as context, we started B2C and then switched to B2B later, partly because of COVID, partly because like we got a lot of inbound demand from businesses that wanted to use our tech. And I am a big fan of starting with angels because most VCs just waste your time in the early days. And they basically do information gathering, but usually don't invest. It's like, especially very early on. So I think the first round should always be more focused on angels. If you have customers who want to invest, that might work as well. I've heard that working, but I wouldn't really bet on that too much, right? They're your customers, they're not necessarily your investors. So I think angels at first, or if you have pre-seed funds, and if I say pre-seed funds, there are some funds that say that they invest from the first day, but most of them actually don't. Like there's this funny joke going around from German pre-seed funds who want to see want to see more traction, right? Because by definition, if you're pre-seed, you usually maybe you've built a product and you have the first user, but once they start talking about revenue traction, you know that they're not the right people to talk about in the very early days. So just be careful who you talk to in the early days, because many people can just waste your time. And yeah, I think angels are just much more comfortable with investing early. And then especially in Germany, there are many, the business angel network is growing, and it's very helpful that more and more ex-startup people are starting to invest. But there are also many people who made their money in the old industry, so not too familiar with early, with real startups. So be very careful what you sign, because I know some friends of mine signed things they in hindsight regretted very, very, very much. So yeah, if you raise money from angels, or just if you raise money anyways from anyone in the early days, be very careful about the terms. Don't give them too many rights, and yeah, start with angels and not with VCs. Only if you know a VC really well, or you know that they invest very early on, then you can go to VCs as well. That's what I would suggest.
You know, I'll jump in on one piece of that, Mike, which I think is probably relevant to your experience too, because YC does this, Techstars, a number of the other accelerators, is they provide safe notes. So they have a standardized terms for their investment, and oftentimes they push the early investors to, especially if it's a smaller kind of seed round, to follow those same terms that tend to be a little bit more founder friendly. You guys got a safe, didn't you, from YC?
Yeah, all of our investments were on safes, but you can't use safes easily in Germany, so you have to use some other convertible. If you have a US LLC, then everything is 10 times easier. Giving out shares is easier, getting investments is easier, bureaucracy is easier. There are obviously other problems, but yeah, German bureaucracy doesn't really help you on that front. What I'm saying is just don't sign, I know a very good friend of mine who signed a deal early on where he got 200K from an angel, but the angel had a right to basically block any follow-on investment. So that he had to actively confirm the follow-on investment. And then the next round, the angel just said, no, I don't want any additional investors, because then I dilute my capital. And then the business literally drove into a wall just because of that. So yeah.
Daniel Hofinger, do you want to ask your question, mate?
Yes, Johann earlier said that accelerators are mainly about growth. And if they are mainly about growth, as for example, VCs are too, would it make sense to find product market fit before applying at an accelerator? Because if it's only about growth, you are in a way hindered to learn more and pivot. And do you see that as a problem, or do you think also that an accelerator makes sense for finding product?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense for finding product market fit. Almost no business has real product market fit when they start in an accelerator. Almost no one. Maybe there are a couple of rare businesses that do have it, but PMF doesn't mean, even if you have your first 2 customers that are paying you, that's not product market fit. So accelerators are there to, yes, help you grow, but not necessarily to help you accelerate your already proven product market fit, but to figure out what product market fit for you actually means, and then trying to find data points that actually support you on your path. I think that's how you should think about it. And then also there are some, as Johann also mentioned, there are some people who literally pivot during the accelerator. So they do something completely different. Like Brex, I don't know if you know Brex. Brex is a multi-billion-dollar valued fintech in the US. They started YC and they were doing some VR play, didn't work out, build something else, and then build some of like one of the best performing companies of the last couple of years. So yeah, definitely don't only apply if you have a product market fit. We literally, to our first accelerator, we literally applied with an idea that we came up like 5 hours before the deadline of the accelerator. And we chose between 2 different ideas and just took one of them, and then like it worked out. So yeah, don't wait too long. The worst thing that can happen is that they say no, right? And helping, like going through the process of an accelerator, through the application process, really helps you to understand your business better, because there are a couple of questions that you have to ask yourself about the business. So I think it doesn't hurt to just fill out the application anyway.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, next one is Daniel, I think.
Yeah, we got one more question from Daniel.
Yeah, hi, Mike. And just want to ask generally, if you look back on your journey, and because I think you had some experience in the startup world before you founded during your prior roles, but when you actually go through this journey on your own, so what were the biggest learnings or surprises, despite the fact that you had already probably more experience than the regular upcoming first founder? So what are maybe general advices or things you would recommend others to look out for, such as things you just mentioned, like the term sheet stuff, etc., or anything else?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, founding, like I knew that founding is hard, but I didn't like, and I was always very resilient. Like I was used to working a lot and pressure and all of that kind of stuff. But I wasn't expecting the emotions to be such a roller coaster of like mornings can feel great, afternoons feel very bad, evenings feel great again. So I think that's very, very true. And that's something that was like, I knew that it was true before, but I didn't really know how true it was. I don't know if that makes sense, but like people told it to me and I knew that I would have to expect it, but then being in the midst of it just feels very different. So that's the first thing. And that's also why you need to have some kind of support network and healthy routine over time, because you can drop into some kind of very unhealthy habits very quickly, and that doesn't work in the long term. So that's the first thing. Just make sure that you can perform at your highest level, because only then you can also build a high performing company. A couple of other things. You just really have to, I think that's true in other jobs as well, but especially as a founder, you have to, in a nice way, annoy the shit out of people to get what you actually want. So pinging 6 times isn't necessarily bad, and sometimes it leads to success. So just be really, really persistent, because people are busy. And when you send out the first email and don't get an answer, that doesn't mean no. So you should be generally, like not in a like demanding way, but just be very persistent about everything. And then the last thing is, almost all standardizable information is out there, but it's very difficult to find and figure out whether it's the right one. So having other people that you could ask for guidance can accelerate you 10x. So like so many things that we learned just because other people helped us in the process. And it's a team play. It's not only a team play in your co-founding team, but with your extended network, with like people you talk to. So really going out and talking to people is very, very helpful.
Okay, good, thanks.
Cool, I think we can do one more.
Yeah, let's do one more.
So Daniel?
Yes, what is your opinion on hiring top down versus bottom up?
Yeah, can you elaborate? Like, you mean for the first hires?
Sure.
Do you mean when we do executive hiring, or what do you
mean? For the first hires. Do you hire first executives, or do you hire first like the bottom up employees who do one single task step of the process?
Yeah, it depends a bit on your business, but I would argue that most people just can't hire executive as their first hires, because no executive wants to work for you because you can't pay them well. And then also executives are used to managing people and to delegating tasks. They're not necessarily used to staying up until 3 a.m. to figure out a bug that was just caused and like exploded in your database. So I think hiring bottoms up makes a lot of sense, but hiring people who can actually help with many, many things. Like either it's a good software engineer or it's someone who can really support on the business side. I think it's very difficult to standardize what you actually need because it depends on the business. But executive hires too early, I don't think that makes too much sense in most cases.
Okay.
Okay, and I think Gerrit still wants to talk about the actual news of the evening and something I'm personally very excited about.
Cool.
So,
thanks, Mike. I really appreciate those insights. That's really, really useful. Great to have your perspective and your experience, and having some sweet WHU representation and arguably the foremost accelerator in the world. So looking forward to seeing your journey. How do people follow your journey in the interwebs? Is there can you give us a quick plug?
Yes, you can add me on LinkedIn. I sometimes write about stuff. I actually launched my new blog this week, where I usually talk mostly about startups or other things that I find interesting. I also talk about business models a lot, either in my podcast or there. So that might, if you're looking for a business model, that might be interesting. And otherwise, if you need any input or support or anything, just reach out. Probably LinkedIn is the easiest because that's where all of us people from WHU like congregate the most. So that should work.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, very much, and hopefully we can get you back as a mentor or an advisor, or telling more of your story on our podcast at some point. But really great to have you.
Great, would love it. So I bounce and prepare some investor calls. It was a pleasure to see everyone, also some familiar faces. And yeah, Gerrit has great news. I'm very excited about it, like really, really excited. So bye, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. I will now bore you with the last part of our presentation for the day. Taking a little bit of what we've talked about from Mike and Johann, I want to present to you kind of the latest initiative coming out of WHU. The Entrepreneurship Center has really been tasked with kind of completing the value chain, the startup value chain at WHU. So new ideas, new teams that are formed can get support from ideation all the way into capitalization and early product market fit. And our flagship program that we're launching this year is WHU's own and first accelerator program. I'd like to preface that by saying, I agree with Mike that there are different tiers and different types of accelerator programs out there. We call this the WHU Accelerator. In my personal opinion, it's more of a pre-accelerator. So, it's not Y Combinator, and that's not its objective. Its objective is to help take early stage ventures and get them to the next phase, whether that's their first capitalization or preparation for one of the top tier accelerators. I really appreciate Mike's story in that he went to a smaller accelerator first, really honed his business model and his founder story, and that's what gave him the opportunity to get into Techstars or to YC. I see a lot of that with Techstars as well. People will come out of a university incubator accelerator or a smaller regional one and really kind of hone their message and their value proposition that allows them to either get funding or go into one of the more notable programs. So we're launching this summer WHU's first accelerator program. What is it? It's kind of an abridged version of the Techstars YC model. So it's a 7-week program, essentially 50 days. Unlike YC or Techstars, being that we're a university that is housed by a Stiftung, we are not taking any equity in any of the startup teams, providing all the same services that another accelerator would, but we're not taking equity. But of course, you're not getting cash either. This is really to accelerate the business, give you the mentorship, the training, the workshops, and connect you with one of WHU's greatest assets, which is our incredible investor community. The program is open to students, of course, but it's also open to alumni and staff. So it's really a program that is geared for everyone in the WHU family that is pursuing a new venture. Applications open today. So it, as of right now, they are officially open. Being that many people are students and oftentimes have to plan summer internships or other programs like that, we're trying to do a little bit more of an aggressive application date. So you'll have a little bit over 2 weeks to complete the applications online. It's a simple form to fill out, and those applications will close at midnight on March 7th. We'll be aggregating those as they roll in, and our selection committee, which consists of some Entrepreneurship Center staff and a group of notable alumni, entrepreneurs, and investors, will be reviewing the applicants and whittling them down into a smaller group, which we will then dedicate 2 days and do interviews with the founder team. Much like Johann talked about, the objective there is to get a sense of the interaction between the teams, their passion for their business model, maybe a little bit of Johann's cruel stress testing will get thrown into the mix as well, but really trying to understand how the teams work together. And important to note that we are not, like Techstars, we're not exclusive of you have to have a fully comprehensive team, but you will certainly do better in the application process the more complete the team actually is. The cohort will be announced shortly the next week after the interviews. We will be making press releases and announcements not only across WHU, but across the German startup ecosystem as well. As you guys know, there's very rarely talk about startups in Germany without mention of WHU. So I think there will be a lot of attention on this, not only from our alumni and our community, but the broader community as well. And then program orientation starts on Friday, May 14th, where the cohort teams will first be introduced to the program in preparation for program start May 17th. That is a Monday. Then the 7-week program commences, goes through Friday, July 2nd, with a big demo day event taking place on Saturday, July 3rd. We anticipate kind of the who's who of investors will be there, and will provide the teams the opportunity to pitch to the people for early stage funding. We've got large groups of angel investors, most of the major VCs in Germany, lots of syndicates and other organizations that have already committed to participating. Talk a little bit about how the program works really quickly. So once we accept the teams, we're talking 8 to 10 teams. We don't have a set number. It's really going to be based on the quality of the teams. What's important to us is that we have a cohort where people are at a similar stage in their growth. That way we can deliver programming that reaches everybody really effectively. But once we make the decision and teams are announced in March, really the program starts then. So what we want to do is make sure, even though people may have classes, have other things to work on, that they're still continuing to work on their business model as much as possible. So from being accepted until the time of the program, you will be undergoing coaching sessions. So each week we'll pair you with a notable alumni or community partner that is an experienced entrepreneur, where we'll be pitching the business. They'll be trying to poke holes in it and really start priming the pump for the accelerator program. And of course, making sure that you guys are maintaining momentum as you go into the program. The first phase of the program, it's the first 2 weeks. Techstars calls it Mentor Madness. I've seen it called a bunch of other different things, but it's essentially the most intense 10 days you may ever have in your life. All of my Techstars teams in Berlin just came out of it, and they look like they haven't slept in a week. It's intense, it's overwhelming, it's exhausting. It's also one of the coolest experiences that you will ever have. Each day, you're going to meet 8 different mentors in like rapid fire, kind of 30-minute meetings where you pitch them, they grill you, they try to pick your business model apart, they give you feedback. You're trying to absorb as much information as possible in a structured way, but you're also starting to identify the mentors that might drive the most value for your business in the long term. At the end of that mentor program, the mentors are allowed to select the teams that they want to work with blindly, and the teams can select the mentors that they want to work with as lead mentors, and then the program will pair them up where they've double opted in, and that will provide you some lead mentors that will support you throughout the duration of the program. The great thing about it, though, is even if someone is not your lead mentor, people are incredible at providing support. So I still work with a number of teams that I wasn't a lead mentor for, but still work with them on an as-needed basis. So you will have access to at least 80, world-class entrepreneurs from our ecosystem that you will be able to work with very closely. And as I said in Mike's talk, it is not uncommon for the mentors in these programs to end up being the early business angels, or in some cases even joining the team. One of my favorite stories is 3-day startup last year. We had a team that we were coaching, and Robert Ermich, who founded Dine Handy and OnTruck, ended up becoming their first investor and has now joined their C-levels as essentially their chief marketing officer. So not only did they find an investor, they found a business partner on that journey. So after your 2 weeks of intensive mentor madness, and worth mentioning that we do give you weekends off. We find that founders need that time to recover, recuperate, collect their thoughts, and frankly, continue working on their business, because during mentor madness, it's so intense that oftentimes founders lack the hours in the day to be able to continue growing their business, working on their product or doing market testing or whatever it might be. So these all happen Monday through Friday. Phase 2 of the program is really 3 weeks long, and that goes from the end of May into June. And it's that 3-week phase is really focused on product market fit, or what Johann kind of mentioned as growth. So this is the time where the teams will have a little bit more time to themselves to be able to work on their venture. There'll be a couple workshops a week on relevant topics, helping with customer discovery or product development or digital advertising, or whatever the topics are that are most relevant to the cohort businesses. So there'll be a few workshops a week. The founding teams will be meeting with their mentors on a regular basis, and they will have time to continue to work on their product and work on their business model. Really, the goal here is, further market validation, deeper product development, and some growth hacking in that process. The third and final phase of the program, which is actually, sorry, that should say 10 days. It's really the last 2 weeks of the program. It's preparing you for the demo day. So it's really focused on crafting your investor pitch, your kind of investment story, your equity story, that we'll be bringing in people that are experts in pitches. We'll have law firms coming in talking about term sheets and negotiating terms and things to look out for, how to engage investors, and we'll actually be bringing in some VC firms early on to give them a closer look and give you some really critical feedback, so you are as prepared as possible to put your best foot forward. So those last 2 weeks, oftentimes teams will split up. The people doing the pitch will be working on that. The others will be scrambling to get some more traction or get their product pushed a little bit farther down the line. But everything is starting to come to a head in this final phase. Of course, this all culminates in the big demo day event. That's going to take place on Saturday, July 3rd. This is the opportunity for the teams to pitch their ventures. Each team will have a breakout fireside chat where there'll be a moderated Q&A from the accelerator staff and allow questions from different investors that are interested in participating. We are doing an entire media and marketing campaign around it. The program is going to be as much as possible recorded so we can kind of maintain a little bit of a documentary about the process. So our goal is also to provide as much exposure and media content to the founding teams as possible. And then we'll have investor kind of networking events taking place as well. And the goal here, of course, is maybe it's to find your first investor if you're ready. Maybe it's to be prepared to gain access to a top tier program like Y Combinator or Techstars. Our networks from those programs will likely be in attendance as well. Now, actually, before I go to that piece, I'm sure there's a question that's in people's minds, which is, how does this all work in relation to COVID? It is always our hope to be able to do things in person, but currently that is not something that we can guarantee is going to be possible. If it is, we will absolutely do it. If it's only available for some people, we are prepared to run a hybrid program with some people remote and some people in person. And of course, if the coronavirus measures mandate it, we will do the program virtually. But I can tell you, last year for Berlin and München Techstars, lockdown happened in the middle of the program. The transition went really well. I mentored Techstars London and now Techstars Berlin and the past two Alchemist cohorts that were purely virtual. And there were actually some great benefits from it. We were able to bring in even higher quality mentors from farther parts of the world and really kind of maximize the time of the founding teams. So it was very efficient. And we've seen that they've been provided a lot more time to focus on their business models rather than bouncing between meetings and doing things like that. So either way, we believe we can deliver this program really effectively, regardless of Corona. So after demo day, there are still more things to take place. WHU has just joined 30 other universities in 8 different countries in Europe, and we are participating in the Stage 2 University Startup Competition. It is Europe's first university startup competition. All of the accelerator teams will automatically be entered in the WHU pitch competition, where WHU startup teams will pitch against each other in early September on campus, hopefully in person in a big event. And the top 2 teams will be selected, will then go to Berlin for the semifinals and finals. The semifinals will consist of at least 60 different startup teams. They will be pitching in front of a jury of a who's who of investors in Europe, with the top 10 making the finals the following day. If you're interested in the investors and the partners in this, you can go to, I think it's stage2.io, and you can kind of learn a bit more about the program. But there will be incredible opportunities for investment, huge media exposure as a part of it. And of course, all of us being WHUers and knowing that we are the Entrepreneurs University, we want to make sure we kick ass and do really well in this competition. So we're going to put our best feet forward on that. And of course, we'll get to stand up next to our peers at some of the other universities across Europe and see where we stand. Like any good accelerator program, we are working with partners right now to set up a bunch of perks. That's all still largely in process, but oftentimes accelerators can offer perks in the hundreds of thousands of euros worth of credit. Free Amazon Web Services, free Google Cloud, Microsoft, HubSpot CRMs. We already have Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, arguably the top startup law firm in the world, who's going to be providing free services to support our teams with setting up their businesses, dealing with their anything from NDAs to term sheets to otherwise. Of course, free banking resources for those that are doing e-commerce and online transactions, things of that sort. And we will be continuing to grow the portfolio of perks up until the day of the program. So even though you won't get cash in exchange for equity, you will get hundreds of thousands of euros worth of resources that are available to accelerator programs. So what is it going to take if you're interested in applying? In the words of David Brown, the founder of Techstars, I'm 100% in agreement. Top 3 criteria are team, team, and team. That can be broken down in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, team competence and team composition is important. If you have a good founder market fit, that means you know your industry or you're passionate about your industry. That is, of course, really good too. And making sure, diversity wins in startup world. So generally, that's always great with teams. If everybody has the exact same skill set and the roles aren't clearly defined, it makes it a little bit tougher. Of course, we want to know the teams have passion. They care about the topic that they're the problem that they're trying to tackle. As Mike said, it's a roller coaster ride of highs and lows. You need to love what you're doing to be able to handle those lows and manage the highs. We're looking for underlying magic, that you have some kind of value proposition that differentiates you in the marketplace. You may not have built out all of your tech yet, but you feel like you have an angle that is going to make you stand out. You have a solid business model and you have traction, but more importantly, you have momentum. We're not looking for teams that are already generating lots of revenue. We're not looking for teams that have a huge client base or, tens of thousands of users. We're looking for teams that have momentum, that have been making progress over time. Being in the university setting, we know nobody is working 100 hours a week on their venture, but we want to make sure that you are working every week on your venture and you're making progress. And we will be monitoring that progress from the date of application until the date of the program to make sure that everyone continues to move forward there. The application form is already available online. Just a couple housekeeping things there. It's one application per team. So if you have teammates, please do it collaboratively. We will throw them away and it will be chaos and it will frustrate the hell out of us, and that's not a good thing to do. So one application per team, do it together. However, each team member will have components that they'll need to provide about themselves. We're going to want to know what your value proposition is, a clear articulation of the problem, how your business solves that problem, what you hypothesize is your business model and your customer acquisition strategy. We do understand it's early stage and many of these things are hypotheses and they may change. Everything from as likely your customer acquisition strategy will change over time. Who knows, maybe even your business model or the problem that you're tackling could change. We ask for an analysis of competition, not because we expect a comprehensive detail, but because we want to know that you've done your homework, that you've done research. We do ask for a pitch deck, and anyone that has questions or has never done that before, they can connect with me personally and I can provide you some hints or some templates. We also ask for a founder video. Important to note that that founder video is not a production. The best way to do that is hang out on Zoom, or if you're actually together, pull out your smartphone and just introduce yourself. It's more about kind of hearing your energy and your presence and what a team looks like together than it is anything that is scripted and meticulous. It's about a feeling, not about the story you tell. The story you tell, we will get from your pitch deck and from the application form. Some of you may have an MVP or a rough prototype or something like that. If you do, screen record it, give us a little demo. It's a nice to have, but it's not something that must be had. That's where you go. bit.ly/WHU Accelerator. The application form is online there. and you can start that process right away. The information is all in there that you will need. Of course, I think most of you should know how to get a hold of me. If you don't, startup@whu.edu. You can always contact me there, and we can answer any questions that you have along the way. We will be sending out more information through the WHU All listserv or the WHU Students listserv. So I will make sure to share a link to this presentation there as well, in case you missed something. And we hope to see many of you that are working on your ventures apply and be part of this first cohort. And I guess the one thing that maybe I didn't mention as well, and I think the other guys talked about it a little bit, but it's something that is incredibly important to me and something that I'm passionate about. But really what makes an accelerator is the network of people that drive it. And I don't mean the staff like me that will be leading the program, but the mentors and of course the investors that will participate as well. It's those mentors that are really the horsepower of the program. And fortunately for us at WHU, it's our alumni that are really the horsepower of our entrepreneurship at this university. And I have now spoken with about 80 alumni, 80 or 90 alumni, and so far every single one of them has said that they would support this and mentor in it. I think our alumni network is incredibly excited that we're delivering something like this. They want to find ways to give back, not just to the student body, but also to the aspiring entrepreneurs in the ecosystem. So if you can imagine the exceptional founders of hugely successful companies that have come out of WHU, you can likely expect to see many, if not all of them, participating in this program. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're already over time, but I do want to provide at least time for those of you that want to stick around and ask any questions. I will hang out and answer them for you. Maybe what you could do, the easiest way would be, instead of having to type in your questions, you could raise your hand and I can call on you. But you'll have to have your video up so I can see you, so I don't have to flip back and forth. Does anyone have any questions, or are you making my job really easy tonight? Oh, Patrick.
Yeah, just one quick one. Is it possible to do multiple application with different teams and different businesses?
I mean, it is. You're welcome to, but I would say the likelihood of you being accepted with your efforts being distributed across would probably score pretty poorly on the momentum side of things. You know, of course, if you have multiple businesses and they're really moving along, sure, you're welcome to. There's no rule against that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Gerrit, it's Daniel. And
hi, Daniel.
Well, just want to check, probably it's the possibility to be accepted, although you are having a regular job, is probably pretty low, because I would assume a 100% participation or availability during the whole 5 to 6 weeks is absolutely required, right?
Yeah, good question. It's probably something I should have covered in the presentation. So in terms of, there's a couple criteria. One criteria is at least one member of the team is either a WHU student, staff, or alumni. When it comes to actual participation in the program, what's important is that at least one member of the team is participating in all of the activities. So there are, it's quite often in accelerators that you know, maybe there is a workshop on user experience, for example, and the CTO or the engineering lead or the product person will attend that workshop while the CEO will be busy working on the business. So when we do have workshops and initiatives, it is not mandatory that the entire team attends every event, but that at least one person attends every event. With that being said, during the weeks of Mentor Madness, you need all hands on deck. So the whole team would really need to make that time available. So in short, it is a very, very intensive program. So if you weren't able to, participate in the majority of it, you probably would not get the benefit out of it that you would want.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So in these few weeks of the program, do you have an estimate of like the time window that it would consume? I'm asking because of the mandatory internships.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about the daily schedule, right? Like what it looks like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mentor Madness is full on. Like those 2 weeks, you really don't have an opportunity to do much else. The next 3 weeks and the next 5 weeks, there's not activities every day. There might be like an afternoon workshop, or oftentimes we'll do like a morning all hands kind of 30-minute check-in meeting, kind of thing. But no, there's a lot more flexibility during that time. Now, for those people that are doing internships, I don't want to get everyone's hopes up, but what I can say is the Master in Entrepreneurship students were approved for internship credit if they got into the accelerator. So for those that are not MIE students, that potential might exist, but we haven't crossed that situation yet. But Stefan Löw did approve internship credit for participants. So that possibility. Now, if you already have an internship, I would say that second half of May, you would not be doing it because you would not have hours in the day. But after that, maybe you would have more flexibility. But it is important to note that, to really get the benefit out of this, like you really need to try to attend most of it or all of it.
And I have another question that is quite specific towards my like entrepreneurial interest and like what market I want to do. And it's like the food and beverage industry. And you talked a lot, and the other presenters, they talked a lot about like CTOs, some head of engineering, like user experience. But in the food beverages industry, it's mostly about the product. And an extra hassle that all the startups have to go through is like the European Food Safety Authority and like the nutrition label certifications, like vegan, gluten-free, lactose-free, these certifications. And I am not entirely sure if like my ideas would really benefit from this accelerator program. And do you have any comments on that?
Sure. I guess first of all, when you think like CTO and you think like engineers, there's analogs for that in other business industries, right? So, a CTO might be your food scientist, right? And so those correlates absolutely exist. I mean, I've invested in a functional food business, and I love that industry. The WHU Accelerator is industry agnostic. It does not matter, and we're going to. One of the reasons we're not announcing all of the mentors yet is because we're going to pair the right mentors with the businesses that we have. So if we have a food business, then we're going to make sure we're tapping into our mentor pool in the food industry. And we have actually, WHU has quite a few, surprisingly. And so we'll tailor the program around the startups that are there in terms of guidance and mentorship. Really, when we look at the criteria and we're looking for how evolved is the business? Do they have the right kind of human resources behind it? And is it an investable venture, right? So when you think about a food business, if you're looking at a fast-moving consumer good or something, great, 100%. If you wanted to start a cafe, that's a small business. So accelerators are for startups. They're for things that have high growth potential. But as far as industry, if you were making socks, or you were making coffee, or you were making a new tech application, we don't care. We just want innovation and growth. Does anyone else have any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for sticking around 10 minutes beyond our normal time. We will be sending out more information through the WHU listserv about this in the coming days. And I hope to see some of your faces in the application process coming up. But thanks again for supporting the Startup School event, and hope to see you all next month for customer development and discovery.